Very warm welcome. You're joining us on our special edition at Hyde Park on Derana 24. The IMF said commendably Sri Lanka has reached important milestones in putting debt in the path towards sustainability. Well, with all that, there are several key milestones that have been reached by Sri Lanka in terms of achieving creditor agreements and other sustainability parameters when it comes to Sri Lanka's debt and moving towards the IMF's expected conditions. To discuss all this, how 2023 was challenging, but more importantly, 2024 and beyond, what the central bank's roadmap and the policy framework is to continue this resurrecting path. We invited to our studios none other than the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, the 17th Governor, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. A very warm welcome to you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Dr. Weerasinghe, for taking the time here. In a statement you mentioned yesterday that April last year, Sri Lanka only reached debt standstill and not bankruptcy. While everyone says Sri Lanka reached a state of bankruptcy, declared bankruptcy, you're clarifying here that it was debt standstill. Maybe we'll start off there.
Yeah, this is, I think, is important clarification because in technical terms, we all know declaring bankruptcy means that any person or any company or any country would not be able to service its external debt anymore without any notice, and basically declaring that we are no longer be able to meet our debt service obligations going forward. Then what happens, usually the creditors will come and say, okay, take all the assets and liquidate and recover whatever the values, and then the person or country or company would be able to go out of the business. That's what we call bankruptcy, declaring bankruptcy. There are certain laws in certain countries. For example, the US, there is a Chapter 11 bankruptcy code, which basically allows a person or company to declare bankruptcy, and then they have to start from zero. What we did, before we are going to end up in that kind of situation if we continue that way. What we did, we announced what we call debt standstill. This is basically asking from all the creditors, please give us some more time. We are not in a position to service your debt for the time being, but we are willing to restructure and give us a longer time to repay your debt, give some concession. So we will start repaying your debt going forward. This is what we call asking for declaring debt standstill, temporary non-payment of debt, not meeting debt service obligations, with an intention to restructure and start repaying on an easier basis going forward. So difference, obviously, if I can cite example, for example, if you have a mortgage with the bank, if you declare bankruptcy, bank will come and take your property, this two-part execution, auction, and you are out of the house, and they take the value and recover their debt, and then whatever balance will you given them, the person is out of the house. But instead, this person can go to a bank, say, so I am in a difficult situation, please give us some more time and some moratorium or something like. So I am willing to make this service obligation good going forward. Please give us some time so that I can become much more sustainable in terms of debt obligations. This is the technical difference between declaring bankruptcy and announcing debt standstill. I think this is very clear because there is a very confusion in the media. Here we are saying that this is declaring bankruptcy is something that ended up with this kind of situation.
To add to that, internationally too, it was mentioned that Sri Lanka declared bankruptcy. So is there an effort here to clarify this among the international media? And secondly, is this something similar to a moratorium that we would request or expect a bank during difficult times?
Exactly. I mean, if you can remember, during COVID times, there are a lot of creditors or people who borrowed money from the banks is asked for moratorium, which means they were given a time until they recover their businesses, not to pay the service obligation now, but pay it later. This is something like moratorium. Actually, you are correct. This terminology is correct. But thing is that people use these terms loosely. Sometimes say declare bankruptcy. That's clear technical term. And actually, what happened suppose that declaring a debt standstill is like similar to debt moratorium.
Governor, 2023, I believe, was the toughest year in terms of putting policy, the framework, in creating and putting the country in a right policy framework towards 2024 and beyond, as is the theme today. Do you think you were successful in bringing the challenges together, analyzing them and really putting a framework in place, or is there more work to be done in 2024?
There's obviously some more work to be done. That's we have to admit. This is not the end of the game. So, but if you compare, we were obviously key point that in 2023 we had was that March 2023 we were able to get the IMF program approved by the Executive Board of the IMF after we reached the staff level agreement was reached in 1st of September 2022, if you can remember. But still, we were not able to get the board approval, board approval for the program until March, because there was financing assurance were needed from our creditors, so that we were able to get that in the first approval of the program. Then the first review was the next important step for us to move ahead and make more progress. So we got that approval from the first review of the IMF program on 12th of December this month. This is an important milestone. For that also, we needed kind of agreements in principle with our official bilateral creditors that they are willing to agree to certain terms and conditions to give us a debt relief for next 10 years or beyond, and also at a lower interest rates and some debt relief. And also we had to complete our domestic debt optimization program. All were done. And as a result, we were able to complete the second part. First completion of first review is another important milestone. That is, in between, there are a lot of certain commitment that we have made with the IMF. For example, getting the approval of the budget by the Parliament for 2024, and having certain policies to ensure we are coming out of the crisis, and then we are moving in the right direction in terms of growth, inflation, all these things. So we had, if you can remember, so if you look at the IMF report that was published after the completion of first review, it would certainly say that, if you can see that, you see out of the commitment that they have made with the creditors and with the IMF and with the globally, we have made almost 99% of commitments have already been delivered by the completion of the first review. Then we have certain other commitments going forward in 2024. Next part, important one, is to have an agreement in principle with commercial creditors like interest sovereign bond ISB holders. That's the next important step. And beyond that, there are certain commitments in terms of policies, implement certain reforms. All these things are next steps. But important one is that we have made a good progress. As I said earlier, we are 2024, 2022 was a difficult year, the worst year in terms of economic performance. 2023, even Q1, the 11.5% negative contraction, and continuously 6 quarters of economic contraction. Now, yesterday numbers prove that we are in the right path and we are coming out of the recession, and first time after 6 quarters, Q3 grew by 1.6%. So this is a positive sign, and we are moving in the right direction. We are in the recovery path, and we need to move steadily and continuously in this path. And 2024 is an important year for us to come back out of the crisis and have a positive movement in terms of economic growth going forward.
Governor, you mentioned it's an achievement, Q3 results. With anticipated Q4 performance, where do you expect Sri Lanka to end the year? And 2024, what are the target numbers?
Yeah, I think in 2023, given the fact that already Q1 negative 11.5%, Q2 around negative 3%, now Q3 plus 1.6%, Q4 will be certainly much higher positive growth. That we have all early indicators say economy is recovering back to normal situation, and overall whole year as a result of negative growth in the first half, so it would still be a negative but close to negative 3%. But going forward to 2024, I'm sure for the whole year I would expect at least about 3% growth for 2024. So that's usually coming back out of the crisis and moving into a right path, and that should continue in next several years going forward.
With the challenges we see globally with war and other constraints to supply chain, what are the challenges you anticipate on the Sri Lankan economy?
Yeah, there are certain headwinds, especially coming from the external sector. For example, now this year global demand for export is much lower than what all expected. From Sri Lanka, all the other countries, exporting countries like China, India, export growth has been low because the whole demand, because all the advanced countries where we are exporting, our export markets have been slowing down because they have been tightening monetary policies, they have been increasing interest rates, demand has been coming down, inflation was rising in these countries. As a result, exports demand were lower. So that's a kind of a headwind, and plus there are a lot of other concerns in terms of Israel-Gaza war. As a result, there would have been acceleration of oil prices to much higher levels, but luckily that has now been subdued to a certain extent, stabilizing. I don't think oil prices would be a bigger challenge going forward for the next year. And also now we see signs of some indication of global interest rates are now kind of at the peak, and there will be a certain loosening from next year onwards that will gradually recover the demand, not as much as what we had in the past, but we can expect some recovery. And from Sri Lanka side, positive part is there are some buffers in terms of tourism is obviously picking up much faster than what we thought even earlier. So that's a low-hanging fruit that will give some cushion or buffer for foreign exchange earnings, and also remittances. As we have seen, there's a significant growth. So some lowering export we can expect, export earnings, but there's a cushion in terms of trade-off. There's support coming from remittance and tourism will certainly help for us to maintain what we call current account. This year 2020 will be current account surplus for the first time for long years. Foreign exchange earnings and expenditure and earnings, the gap between for the country, first time will be positive for 2023. But that is partly because of the low imports, because there are some import restrictions in place. But we are going to relax that going forward. But still, even next year, we are expecting the much kind of a lower or smaller current account deficit, which will help us to maintain some stability in terms of exchange rate, for us to be able to build up our reserves to a much more comfortable level. So, I mean, this year also is a significant improvement in terms of foreign exchange reserves that we are building up. As from almost zero levels, we have been almost like usable reserves well above 2 billion. It will be close to 3 billion by the end of the year with IMF money, World Bank aid money coming in. So next year with the program, there is some more concessional financing coming up, as well as a debt relief. We are expecting from external creditors that will reduce the debt service burden with that relief. Without that, it would have been $6 billion per year debt service obligations for the country, for the government only. So that's why debt restructuring, as I said, the standstill and restructuring completion, and we are coming to a path where we can service our external debt in a much more affordable and much easier way, so that we can build up our resources on the long-term basis and build cushions for the country.
You mentioned the encouraging reserves position. At the same time, if you go back to the debt restructuring process and our debt servicing, if you can give us the numbers to understand, Governor. You said this is a massive burden that will be lifted from our shoulders as a country. At the same time, debt restructuring, the creditor agreement, the memorandum of understanding is yet to be signed. However, they have confirmed in principle that they will be supportive of Sri Lanka's debt restructuring process. But what does this really mean for the country? If you can give us more clarity on this.
Yeah, in terms of the process, what we have obtained is the agreement in principle from all bilateral official creditors that they have agreed to a certain terms and conditions, and for a longer period. So certain period of debt concession, like paying all interest, so grace period, and then after that longer period of debt service payments, which will bring down our debt service payment. So next step is to, once we reach agreement in principle, then we have to sign MOUs and sign one by one agreement. That's a technical normal procedural process. Once you get the agreement, it's put in the agreements, put in the agreement in principle into paper, sign all these loan agreements. That's a normal formal process that will happen anyway. So trying to finish that part first sooner. Next one is to obtain a similar agreement in principle, comparable terms with commercial creditors. That we are hoping to get in within next couple of months. Then we had to sign agreements, exchange the sovereign bonds we had got, and we have to buy back sovereign bonds and issue a new longer tenure bonds, like we did for the domestic debt optimization. For example, all the treasury bonds issued to funds were taken back by the government and issued new longer term bonds. So that similar thing will have to happen with the commercial credit. So those are the important steps that we have to complete to get the longer term debt relief, and our ability to pay would be much more strengthened, and we will bring down the debt sustainability within the parameters of the IMF based on IMF debt sustainability analysis. That's the next step. I think this is where I think role of the IMF there. I have to clarify that also. There are a lot of debate about this. We are doing what IMF is saying. No, it's not that. It's our program, and we have submitted. This is our program for next 4 years, to reach the sustainability, to take the economy out of the crisis and take the economy back to a growth path. These are the reforms: macroeconomic stability, structural reforms, and governance and corruption issues, social safety net. This is our own program. The IMF role is to look at this program and ensure and give a kind of a certificate, like, this is program would ensure this country will come back to the normal growth path, country will be able to service its external debt. That assurance is needed, and needed that comfort for the external creditors, for them to give the debt relief. For example, if the creditor is given a debt relief, they want to have some assurance from some independent party that this country will be able to service even the relief basis, the service obligations for next 10 years. So IMF role as an independent agency to look at our program, look at our commitments, and give that assurance, okay, this program is good. If we go through this path, this country will be able to come out of this crisis, come back to normal growth path. Country also importantly will be able to service their debt obligations on a confirmed and on that basis going forward. So creditors need that assurance. This is the role of the IMF.
So, Governor, you're saying that this is not a set of conditions or regulations or rules that the IMF has put forward, but it is a country program that the Sri Lankan team has put together, but the IMF is holding you responsible for it.
Exactly. Yeah. So this not only IMF, the creditors will hold us responsible. So when going forward, creditors will say, okay, we'll give you this debt relief, but if you deviate from this path that we are given assurance to the world, to the IMF and all the creditors, we will have to go back, and if we deviate this path, our agreement would not be valid. So they are giving that assurance on that basis.
How important is it for Sri Lanka to comply, especially for Sri Lankan businesses, this debt restructuring, whether it's domestic debt restructuring or our external debt restructuring process? Because there has been a lot of confusion and sometimes controversy surrounding why Sri Lanka, you addressed it at the beginning, why Sri Lanka is giving in to IMF conditions. But how important is this program now?
No, this is important for the country, not for the IMF or not anyone else. This is important for the country to get that relief, and most importantly, what we are calling, this is sovereign debt crisis, government debt crisis. This is not the private sector business debt crisis. So how that can benefit the country and the private sector businesses is that with this lower debt service obligation by the government needs to finance their obligations or meet their debt deficits, and the money or resources they need from the market, domestic or external, would be much lower. What does that mean is that then there are available resources in the country, in the banking system, for the private sector to get their credit. So if the government has large debt service obligation, which means government will extract all the resources available in the market for them to finance their deficit. Instead, the deficits are going to be lower, that the service obligations are going to be lower, and there will be more resources available for the private sector, so that there will be more credit available for the private sector. And parallelly, we are bringing down the interest rates in our monetary policy, so that low interest rates and more resources available in the banking system for the private sector to have credit. That will certainly boost the economic growth, that will reactivate economic activities, that will give some lot of support for the sectors that those were affected by the crisis last year and early this year. This is the benefit that country is going to get. This is the benefit the whole people in the country, whole businesses, all the sectors will going to get in terms of debt restructuring and in terms of lower debt service requirements by the government, which means whole country will benefit out of this.
What will be the interest rate regime going forward? Your expectation?
Yeah, our expectation, as you say, as we announced, Central Bank has a very clear inflation target now. So we have publicly announced we want to maintain inflation between 4 to 6%, which means around 5% going forward on a medium to long term basis. Current low inflation is 3 to 4, came down to 1%, 3-4%. It may be temporary, but it will come back to a longer term basis 5%. So the interest rate is a function of the inflation that we can maintain. If the country wants a stable low inflation, low interest for the businesses, we have to ensure we maintain low inflation going forward, around 5%. So inflation is going to be 5% on longer term, medium to long term basis, which means the policy rate can be around 8 to 9% instead of now 9.5%. We have bringing down, and still, in my view, is 9.5% compared to if we maintain 5% inflation. We still have some space to bring it down. But what we announced last monetary policy review, we reduced further, but we want to wait for some time to see permanent and long-term basis inflation stabilize around this trend. Then obviously we will bring it down, and also there's still some market interest rates to come down further compared to where policy rates are around 9%. But if you see treasury bill rates, benchmark rates, is still around say 13%. The prime lending rate still last week 12.5%. There's still the room that market lending rates, as I said earlier, less demand from the government for their debt service, more resources available in the market for the private sector, and lower interest rates. These interest rates should come down further for market interest rates, prime lending and other lending rates. So with that, market will bring down further, and going forward, we will be also easing some policy rates, so that the whole rate structure it should come down. I think I would say maybe prime lending should come around single digit rates going forward, and other creditors SME, depending on the risk premium, there can be some additional 1-2% for SME creditors. So that will happen. So that's where we want to be under normal economic circumstances. We can see economic is recovering, and under normal circumstances, this has to be an interest rate structure going forward. That is how we can maintain stability and predictability of monetary policy, is stability and predictability of the inflation. If you can reach inflation around 5%, maintain inflation, which means there will be stable interest rate regime, and also that will help to maintain a stable exchange rate as well, because this is a flexible exchange rate regime. It's no longer our intervention. We are no longer setting exchange rate, we are setting interest rates. Exchange rate would be determined by the market. So for us to have market determined exchange rate, important one is to maintain low inflation. That will ensure stability of the exchange rate.
You mentioned about how tourism and other industries are really contributing going forward to the economy after falling rock bottom during the crisis. But do you see, while the central bank is bringing certain policy framework and certain other indicators working towards these, that these industries are also seeing a sustainable, maybe fixing these industries with policy changes necessary to support the economy in the long run?
Yeah, this is also important. This is not only macroeconomic stability is important for country to grow, it's also several policies. For example, access to markets through pre-trade agreements, access for exporters to India, Europe, Thailand, China, all these countries. So easy access to market is the most important for us to move towards export-oriented economic growth. First part, and also we need to attract more foreign direct investments into the areas that we need investments. For example, renewable energy is a great potential in this country. To bring down the cost of electricity generation is an important factor for industry to grow. So currently, cost of electricity is much higher compared to a lot of other countries. So we need to bring it down. How can we bring it down? By bringing low-cost renewable energy, open up this competition for the world, and they can bring in this technology, bring in investment, and bring down the cost of electricity generation. And from the macro point of view, it's our responsibility is to bring down inflation, maintain that level, and have a stable exchange rate, and have proper fiscal policies to ensure that there are resources available for the others, and also other structural reforms, like for example, female labor force participation. As you know, this country, only 35% of female are in the workforce, compared to male labor force participation over about 60%. We need to bring that resources to the workforce and create employment opportunities, be able to, for these old women who are not working, give them skills, let them prepare for the new economy, and technology-wise, in terms of digital technology, in IT education, ability to work and support other kind of structural issues like the provide proper childcare services, be able to have proper public transport, and we make the working environment, flexible labor and land policies, and also a lot of things are barriers to do business, ease of doing business, making it easier to make tax payments, make it easier to import and export through customs, make it easier to do business and get the permission, and all these structural reforms. Those are important reforms. Parallel, these are not, and this is one, there's a debate that IMF has and this is not the responsibility of IMF. IMF responsibility is to give, as I said, give the assurance to the world that we are going in the right path, but it's up to us. What we need to do is to support industry, support the economy, support the services to come back to a normal situation, do all the reforms, land reforms, labor reforms, other issues of doing business, make it more like labor force, more productive. Agriculture modernization is other important area. We have 28% of labor in the economy working for agriculture, but only producing 7% of GDP. So we need to have more productive agriculture sector in this country, and get that labor out of this agriculture, excess labor, and employ them in a more productive industry and services sector, so that this labor can earn high incomes instead of remain in poverty doing all the agriculture, less productive agriculture. People who do agriculture need to have more high incomes through productivity improvements, and let the excess labor come and earn high incomes in the other services. Those are the reforms, and that has to happen going forward in the medium to long term basis. That's the path we need to take going forward.
We'll talk about Sri Lanka's reforms and how Central Bank will support Sri Lanka's path towards prosperity and development going forward when we come back after this short break. We're in conversation with the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. Welcome back. We're talking about Sri Lanka's economy 2024 and beyond with the Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe. We're talking about development reforms and how the Central Bank is supporting, but what inclusive development, what efforts do you expect the government also to contribute to have an inclusive and equitable development process in the country?
This is, in fact, if you look at the economic growth, especially during the crisis, with the high inflation and economic contraction, a lot of people lost employment in the SME sectors. The economy contracted by 8% last year. Inflation was 70%. In that kind of situation, who were the worst affected people in this country are the poor. People falling below the poverty line has increased. World Bank says it's about 25% people under poverty now, low-income people. So that's where in terms of equity, in this kind of situation, first group of people government has responsibility to look after are the people, the low-income people, those who are fallen into poverty. That is why it's important that government ability to support these people in terms of samudri or some kind of social safety net to protect their, at least make them sustainable living, and at least give some support from the government, from the taxpayer. So how the equitable growth means give them a support and make them at least sustain in this difficult environment, and have this resource for government is to collect taxes from people who can afford. That is where tax policy is something, reallocation of resources, collect taxes from people who can afford and use their resources to support people who are worst affected. That's why equity principle in terms of taxation. And how you do that is a debate for the parliament, government, Minister of Finance to do that. You increase VAT or increase income tax. So each target should be taxed, how to put in tax. And those are issues.
In your expertise, what do you think this tax policy should be for Sri Lanka? Should we have our own unique set of taxes where you target certain industries or certain segments? Or are you happy with the current structure?
In my view, there shouldn't be any exemptions to certain industry sectors. It has to be fair, broad base, and if that is tax is 18% VAT, everyone should be covered, liable to pay value-added tax. And only exception for exporters. Usually they are not supposed to pay value-added tax. Less exemption it will be better for the collection. It will be simple, and it will be much better and also fair and equitable. That's what one principle I would like to say. And secondly, even income tax. Obviously, high income people should be paying higher taxes. And also, this important part is to make everyone responsible. Those even people based on the income, as a citizen, there is a responsibility to make their contribution to the economy, to the country as a taxpayer. But the issue what we see is that even we have 8.5 million labor force in this country. Tax files, I was told, is about much less. Even all taxpayers less than 500,000 out of 8.5 million workforce, which means larger portion of employment businesses workforce outside the tax net. That is why we have this very high taxes. I certainly would agree with everyone. This certain current tax rates are high, but tax collection is still not sufficient. How we can make, ideally, we need to go to a regime where tax rates are low, which is basically people who are having the burden paying taxes should have individually, corporately, firm-wise, they should have lower tax rates. But everyone else, burden should be shared fairly, equally among everyone. So, for example, that's where a lot of people asking me, professionals say, I am paying too much taxes, too many taxes, but I don't see. I say you go and see what you get from the government: education, health, your education, your children education, your safety, all these things are taxpayer money. But I agree, because if you don't like to pay taxes, it's the best way to get people outside taxes into the taxes. If I can't afford to pay 30% of my income or 36% of my income, only to bring it down. For me to encourage someone else outside to come in, then I can pay not 36% but less.
To share the burden among all
share
citizens.
The burden among equal. That's the equity principle.
But what about those who don't fall into the radar, Governor? This is also a big question in society today. Those who are evading totally of declaring their assets and income.
Yeah, this is important. That's why this is a tax evasion is a serious issue in this country. So that's why it's unfair for people who pay taxes paying much higher taxes, where some people who are evading tax, outside tax, are not paying any. So this is where the strong reforms in the institutions, for example, inland revenue, the customs, tax collecting authority for the government, should have a strong institutional reforms to ensure the systems and the information, and so that they can catch people, who they can bring in people who are outside the net. This is how a lot of countries work. Basically, if you look at advanced countries, the systems are in place. Digitalization, information availability for those who are outside tax net, and get them into tax net and get them pay taxes, so that burden should be lower than what we see now. So therefore, those things, there are certain procedures, programs are in place, but you need to bring it out technology. Digital ID, so one can, less cash transaction, and no, having two sets of books by the businesses. We know a lot of businesses have two sets of books, one for taxation purpose, other one for their own business. we should be able to, tax authority should be able to catch all these people, bring them into tax and then make it equitable and fair for everyone.
What's the level of funding expected with the approval of the second tranche of the IMF, Governor?
Now the second tranche IMF will already we have got that $330 million as second tranche. With that, ADB and World Bank are giving another, World Bank is 250 million, ADB another 200 million, it's about another 650 plus close to 800 million with this tranche approval. So similarly, every tranche there are there's a linked disbursement by ADB World Bank, and also in addition, once you complete the restructuring, there will be other bilateral cases like Japan will restart some of the projects those are suspended temporarily due to debt standstill. Those will be starting, and there will be additional support coming from the creditors. That's for the government. In addition, there are other places like, for example, if they are moving into right direction, then there will be foreign direct investments for the other projects like say renewable energy, oil refinery, port city, the Amuwatte, this north and east south projects. These are private investment that also catalyze, boost the country's foreign exchange inflows.
You mentioned the reforms that are needed and that are ongoing. And talking about ease of doing business and foreign direct investments, do you see that we are moving towards easing up the doing business environment in Sri Lanka, or necessary reforms taken to facilitate FDIs that will flow in after the debt restructuring process, or some agreement is reached?
I think in terms of ease of doing business, there's a lot to do in my view. And there are separate government agencies doing that. I know there's a program and initiative by certain agencies to make it easier. But there's a long way to go. I think my view still in this country it's not easy to do business. A lot of bureaucratic red tapes, a lot of procedures, a lot of some corruption, all these things are happening. That's not easy. So that is a process that will take place and that should take place. That should happen. This is where if you read important ones in the governance diagnostic report, governance and corruption diagnostic report by the IMF that was published. That's a great thing that was published. That report identifies a lot of areas that need to be improved and needs important reforms, so that will make it easier for people to do business in this country. Those are important ones. Still, I think I can see there's a lot of things to be done. This is not sufficient to me. There's a lot of things to be done.
Moving on to talk about the banking sector itself, what is the central bank? Does the central bank sort of like monitor the kind of risk potential, and how is the central bank proactively responding to this, given that in the past and even in the present we see that the people, given the crisis, are prey of many schemes?
Now, this is important part. This is our direct responsibility, central bank. One of the other objectives is to maintain financial system stability, especially in deposit taking institutions like banks and non-bank financial institutions. If you look at last year, banks, finance sector were in a very difficult situation. All the people say banks are making a lot of money. Obviously, banks should make profits, otherwise banks can't sustain. But there's a difficult situation in terms of when inflation was high, interest rates were high, exchange rates were depreciating, people's ability to service their debt obligation, like the country, a situation, business also had the difficult situation. As a result, what they call stage 3 loans, non-performing loans ratio, went up to almost 13.5%. So out of their portfolio, people are not able to meet their obligation. 13.5% of people are not being able to service their debt obligation. Then they are also in a difficulty, which means banks also are in a difficult situation, because banks are the ones who are basically responsible for collecting deposits from the public, ensure deposits are safe and there is sufficient liquidity and earn sufficient return for them to be able to give the return. So the last year was a difficult year, but if you can remember, that's where there a lot of talk about the losing deposit of money and the debt restructuring will have impact on deposits. That's why we have been very carefully managed that situation last year. It's our responsibility to ensure banking sector remains stable, so that all the money by the public deposits are safe and secure. That's a key responsibility of the central bank. So we have been able to do that. Even going forward, there will be still some stresses. For example, external debt restructuring. There are local banks, those are holding interest foreign bonds. And there are certain foreign currency debt by petroleum corporation taken by the government that also will have to be restructured. So in addition to non-performing loans, there are other areas where some impact on the banking sector. That is why, if you can remember, the budget announced allocated 450 billion. If there is a need for recapitalization of the two state banks or the banks, government has already, in our request, based on our assessment, there is a buffer created through the budget, the public sector money, 450 billion, in case with the restructuring, if there is a support, there is a recapitalization coming needed for the banks, then there is allocation. This is within the debt sustainability parameters, within the government financing needs. All this within that, we have been able to create that space so that any eventual impact can be taken care of through this budget allocation. So that's a very important move that will ensure going forward bank system stability, which is most important. And what we had, the debt crisis, sovereign debt crisis, and balance of payment crisis. Banking crisis is the last thing any country would want. That will be a collapse of the whole country. So that's why our responsibility is to ensure bank sector is stable. I can give the assurance that this country, the difficult time is now over. Going forward, we'll have a stable financial system that will facilitate growth, that will provide credit for the businesses, that will secure deposit of the public. That's the important part.
That's definitely an encouraging note from you as we end the year. But one more question, Governor. The need for state development banks, especially to spur innovation, development among SMEs. This has been discussed, but what is your view here? And there has been talk about improving these.
No, this is an idea of, I think, that's been discussed for a long time, what they call development bank concept. Whether we need to have a separate development bank for development purposes or provide SME credit and long-term credit for projects. That was the idea. But in my view, so that was a concept we had in the past, what they call development banks. DFCC and NDB were set up for that purpose in the past. But those days, because we were a low-income country, we were getting concessional kind of financing to support that kind of project from external agencies. But once we have become a medium to long middle income country, we are no longer have access to that kind of concessional credit for this kind of development bank activities. Having said that, but we need long-term financing for development purposes. That not only one bank, in my view, whole the banking sector should be able to facilitate and provide this long-term financing on a commercial basis. Not only one bank, I don't think that will restrict the activities only to one bank. The idea or strategy should be should our whole banking sector would be able to provide that long-term financing on the basis of raising long-term funds. That is where the country's rating and our ability to recover and restructuring a bank sector will have much better rating. With that, they should be able to attract, raise longer term capital from what they call development financing agencies abroad. For example, one example, recently USA, the Development Financial Corporation gave $500 million long-term loan for one of the projects to the banking system. So we need to attract those kind of financing from overseas by the whole banking system instead of having one bank for this purpose.
Governor, we have about 30 seconds for 2024. How would you leave a message for our people?
2024, I think in my view, as I said at the beginning, when I took over, it was a car, sloping, going down the slope without control, going to crash. And now we have been able to stabilize that, and we are going back to the start of the recovery and coming back up the slope. That's why 11.5% goes 1.5% already the recovery started. So going forward, we need to continue on steady long-term basis. This 1.5 will have with 3%, then all long-term basis 3 to 5%, which means we are on the right path. We are moving in the right direction. We need to ensure we go in this direction on a steady, continuous basis without falling into a earlier bad path and bad policies. That's why it's important for us to ensure whole country will be moving in the same direction.
Thank you very much, Governor, for your tireless efforts and for your conversation tonight and the path that you are talking about for Sri Lanka to come out of crisis towards a sustainable development path. Thank you for your time here at Hyde Park. We had with us Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe, talking about 2024 and beyond here at Hyde Park on Other Derana 24.